When you open up a Bible, the first thing you notice is that it's split into two main parts, right? The Old Testament and the New. But what if that division is a little bit misleading? What if we're not actually looking at two separate books, but at one single, unfolding epic story?
Yeah, it's so easy to see them as just, before and after. But the idea we're going to dig into here is that they're really Act 1 and Act 2 of the very same play. And believe it or not, the entire plot gets kicked off by a single promise made way back in the beginning.
So, here's how we're going to connect the dots. First, we'll get a handle on what a covenant even is. Then we'll hunt down that one crucial promise that starts everything. We'll see how it plays out in the Old Testament, how it finds its conclusion in the New, and how it all comes together to tell one single cohesive story.
Okay, let's start with that word, testament. It sounds kind of formal, maybe a little old-fashioned, but all it really is another word for a much more powerful idea, a covenant. And this one concept, well, it's the key that unlocks the entire biblical storyline.
So, what is it? Put simply, a covenant is a formal, binding agreement. I mean, think of it like a treaty between two countries or a really serious contract. It lays out the rules of a relationship with promises and expectations for everyone involved. This idea is pretty much the legal and relational backbone of the entire Bible.
And this is where we get the two big ones. The Old Covenant, that's God's agreement with one specific people, the nation of Israel. But then you have the New Covenant, which describes a brand new agreement, this time between God and the church, a global community made up of people from every nation. So, what connects them? How do you get from one to the other? Well, it turns out that both of these huge agreements, which cover thousands of years of history, actually flow from one single promise made to one man. This promise, given right at the start of Israel's story, is like the source code for everything that comes after.
And here it is. This is the promise God makes to a guy named Abraham. He's told to pack up and leave everything he knows, and in return, God gives him this absolutely massive promise. This one statement from Genesis basically sets the entire plot for the rest of the Bible. And if you listen really closely, you can actually hear two different parts to it.
Let's break that down for a second. Part 1, I will make you into a great nation. Okay, that's a specific national-level promise. But then there's Part 2, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Whoa, that is a global, universal promise. The entire biblical story from here on out is basically these two promises being fulfilled one after the other.
So let's tackle Part 1, making a great nation. You could honestly read the entire Old Testament as the story of God doing exactly that, taking Abraham's family and, through a really epic and often messy journey, forming them into the nation of Israel.
But what did great actually mean here? It wasn't about having the biggest army or the most money. Nope. According to the story, Israel's greatness was all about its unique relationship with God. He would live among them in a special way. He gave them his laws. They were chosen to be like priests for the rest of the world. And this is crucial, the family line of a future savior would come directly from them.
But the story was never, ever meant to end with just one nation. That first promise? It was always the setup for the second, much bigger one. Once we get to the New Testament, it's like the camera zooms way out and the focus shifts from the nation of Israel to the global blessing that was promised to come through them.
You can really see here how the whole story just pivots on one point in history. On the left, you have the Old Covenant, all focused on the story of Israel. And then right in the middle, you have Jesus Christ, who acts like the bridge. He's presented as the one who fulfills that old agreement and kicks off the new one, taking that original promise and extending it from just one nation to everybody.
So was this global expansion just some sudden plot twist? Or was this connection, this idea of a worldwide blessing coming through one person, hinted at all along? Well, if you look back into the Old Testament, the clues were definitely there.
For hundreds of years, prophets in Israel were delivering these incredibly specific messages. They kept pointing to a coming Messiah, a Savior, who would be a direct descendant of Abraham and King David. They even named the town where he'd be born, Bethlehem. They insisted his mission wouldn't just be for Israel, but for everyone. And then, in a crazy twist, they predicted he would suffer and die to save his people.
So when you pull the camera back and look at the big picture, you see it's not two separate stories at all. It's one story, told in two acts, where the second act is the conclusion that the first one was always building towards. It's the final tying together of those two original promises.
This really puts the whole story in a nutshell. The promise of a great nation, that's the story of Israel in the Old Testament.
And the promise of a global blessing for all people? Well, that's the story of Jesus and the international church in the New Testament. It's two parts of a single promise, fulfilled across two testaments, creating one unified narrative from start to finish.
And that leaves us with one last question to think about. If this ancient collection of books isn't just a random library, but is actually structured as one unfolding story, moving from a single nation to a global blessing, how does that change the way we read it? And what does it tell us about what its ultimate purpose might really be? Thanks for tuning in to this explainer.